Good evening. Let's read a bit. I start to get tired. I have recorded a lot of videos today. I'm looking my old jackets. I have to continue tomorrow because it's dark and I start to get tired. So let's read. It's 5 p.m.
Book of Exodus. The Book of Exodus, from ancient Greek, Romanized, Exodus, Biblical Hebrew, Names, Latin, Liber Exodus, is the second religious book of the Bible. It is a narrative of the Exodus, the origin myth of the Israelites leaving slavery in biblical Egypt through the strength of their deity named Yahweh, who according to the story chose them as his people. The Israelites then journey with the legendary prophet Moses to Mount Sinai, where Yahweh gives the 10 Commandments and they enter into a covenant with Yahweh, who promises to make them a holy nation, and a kingdom of priests on condition of their faithfulness. He gives them their laws and instructions to build the tabernacle, the means by which he will come from heaven and dwell with them and lead them in a holy war to conquer Canaan, the promised land, which has earlier, according to the myth of Genesis, been promised to the seed of Abraham, the legendary patriarch of the Israelites. Traditionally ascribed to Moses himself, modern scholars see its initial composition as a product of the Babylonian exile, 6th century BCE, based on earlier written sources and oral traditions, with final revisions in the Persian post-exilic period, 5th century BCE. 1. 2. American biblical scholar Carol Mayers, in her commentary on Exodus, suggests that it is arguably the most important book in the Bible, as it presents the defining features of Israel's identity, memories of a past marked by hardship and escape, a binding covenant with their God, who chooses Israel, and the establishment of the life of the community and the Gideons for sustaining it. 3. The consensus among modern scholars is that the story in the Book of Exodus is best understood as a myth. 4. Title. The English name Exodus comes from the ancient Greek, Romanized, Exodos, lit. Way out, from X, out and, hodos, path, road. In Hebrew the book's title is, Shint, names, from the beginning words of the text. These are the names of the sons of Israel. Hebrew, 5. Historicity. Most mainstream scholars do not accept the biblical Exodus account as historical for a number of reasons. It is generally agreed that the Exodus stories were written centuries after the apparent setting of the stories. 6. Archaeologists Israel Finkelstein and Neil Asher Silberman argue that archaeology has not found evidence for even a small band of wandering Israelites living in the Sinai. The conclusion that Exodus did not happen at the time and in the manner described in the Bible seems irrefutable. Repeated excavations and surveys throughout the entire area have not provided even the slightest evidence. 7. Instead, they argue our modern archaeology suggests continuity between Canaanite and Israelite settlements, indicating a heavily Canaanite origin for Israel, with little suggestion that a group of foreigners from Egypt comprised early Israel. 8. 9. Although no major excavations have actually been conducted in the Sinai, as Richard Elliott Friedman has pointed out in an interview regarding the historicity of the Wandering Period. 10. However, a majority of scholars believe that the story has some historical basis. 11. 12. Though disagreeing widely about what that historical kernel might have been. 13. Kenton Sparks refers to it as mythologized history. 14. Some scholars such as Benjamin J. Noonan have pointed out that the presence of Egyptian Papyrus Oxyine Chas 1075, a 3rd or 4th century CE manuscript showing part of Exodus 40 cognates in the Exodus and wilderness traditions entered Hebrew during the Late Bronze Age, precisely when we would expect them to have been borrowed if the events of these narratives really occurred, challenging the assumption of a post-exilic tradition. 15. Furthermore, in direct response to popular claims that the Exodus wandering period lacks evidence in the Sinai region, various anthropologists of Near Eastern history have noted that a lack of material culture from the Israelites in the Book of Exodus is actually expected given what is known about historical and present semi-nomadic peoples. 16. In addition to this, Egyptologists such as David Falk, Kenneth Kitchen, Benjamin Noonan, and James K. Hoffmeyer argue that the Book of Exodus contains many affinities with the late 2nd millennium BC, specifically the 13th century BC, and that it is nearly impossible that someone in the 7th to 5th centuries BC could have known of them, unless the tradition dated back to a much earlier time period. 17, 18, 19. They argue that the Exodus was a real historical event that occurred in the mid-13th century BC during the reign of Ramesses II. 20. Due to a passage in 1 Kings 1:6, some hold to the early date view, being that the Exodus occurred in 1446 BC, but many Egyptologists who believe in a biblical Exodus argue against this, and say that the 480 years is a symbolic /idiomatic number, since the numbers 7, 12, 40, and their multiples, which would include 480, were commonly used in the ancient Near East to denote a long period of time. 21, 22. Structure. There is no unanimous agreement among scholars on the structure of Exodus. One strong possibility is that it is a diptych, i.e., divided into 2 parts, with the division between parts 1 and 2 at the crossing of the Sea or at the beginning of the Theophany, appearance of God, in chapter 19. 23. On this plan, the first part tells of God's rescue of his people from Egypt and their journey under his care to Sinai, chapters 1:19, and the second tells of the covenant between them, chapters 20-40. 24. Summary. 1585 map 1641 map historical representations of the stations of the Exodus. The text of the Book of Exodus begins after the events at the end of the Book of Genesis, where Jacob's sons and their families joined their brother Joseph in Egypt, which Joseph had saved from famine. It is 400 years later, and Egypt's new pharaoh, who does not remember Joseph, is fearful that the enslaved and now numerous Israelites could become a 5th column. He hardens the label and orders the killing of all newborn boys. A Levite woman named Josh saves her baby by setting him adrift on the Nile in an ark of bulrushes. Pharaoh's daughter finds the child, names him Moses, and brings him up as her own. Finding of Moses in the Dura Europos synagogue, c. 244 later, a grown Moses goes out to see his kinsman. He witnesses the bus of a Hebrew slave by an Egyptian overseer. Angered, Moses kills him and flees into Midian to escape punishment. There, he marries Zipporah, daughter of Jethro, a Midianite priest. While tending Jethro's flock, Moses encounters God in a burning bush. Moses asks God for his name, to which God replies with 3 words, often translated as I am that I am. This is the book's explanation for the origin of the name Yahweh, as God is thereafter known. God tells Moses to return to Egypt, free the Hebrews from slavery and lead them into Canaan, the land promised to the seed of Abraham in Genesis. On the journey back to Egypt, God seeks to kill Moses. Zipporah circumcises their son and the attack stops. See Zipporah at the inn. Moses reunites with his brother Aaron and, returning to Egypt, convenes the Israelite elders, preparing them to go into the wilderness to worship God. Pharaoh refuses to release the Israelites from their work for the festival, and so God curses the Egyptians with 10 terrible plagues, such as a river of blood, an outbreak of frogs, and the thick darkness. Moses is commanded by God to fix the spring month of Aviv at the head of Hebrew calendar. The Israelites are to take a lamb on the 10th day of the month, sacrifice the lamb on the 14th day, daub its blood on their mezuzot doorposts and lintels, and to observe the Passover meal that night, during the full moon. The 10th plague comes that night, causing the death of all Egyptian firstborn sons, prompting Pharaoh to expel the Israelites. Regretting his decision, Pharaoh commands his chariot army after the Israelites, who appear trapped at the Red Sea. God parts the sea, allowing the Israelites to pass through, before drowning Pharaoh's pursuing forces. Geography of the Book of Exodus with the Nile River and its delta, left the Red Sea and Sinai Desert Center, and the land of Israel, upright as desert life proves arduous. The Israelites complain and long for Egypt, but God miraculously provides manna for them to eat and water to drink. The Israelites arrive at the mountain of God, where Moses' father-in-law Jethro visits Moses. At his suggestion, Moses appoints judges over Israel. God asks whether they will agree to be his people. They accept. The people gather at the foot of the mountain, and with thunder and lightning, fire and clouds of smoke, the sound of trumpets, and the trembling of the mountain, God appears on the peak, and the people see the cloud and hear the voice, or possibly sound, of God. God tells Moses to ascend the mountain. God pronounces the 10 Commandments, the ethical decalogue, in the hearing of all Israel. Moses goes up the mountain into the presence of God, who pronounces the covenant code of righteous and civil law and promises Canaan to them if they obey. Moses comes down from the mountain and writes down God's swords, and the people agree to keep them. God calls Moses up the mountain again, where he remains for 40 days and 40 nights, after which he returns, bearing the set of stone tablets. God gives Moses instructions for the construction of the tabernacle so that God may dwell permanently among his chosen people, along with instructions for the priestly vestments, the altar and its appurtenances, procedures for the ordination of priests, and the daily sacrifice offerings. Aaron becomes the first hereditary high priest. God gives Moses the 2 tablets of stone containing the words of the 10 Commandments written with the finger of God. 25. While Moses is with God, Aaron casts a golden calf, which the people worship. God informs Moses of their apostasy and threatens to kill them all, but relents when Moses pleads for them. Moses comes down from the mountain, smashes the stone tablets in anger, and commands the Levites to massacre the unfaithful. Worship of the golden calf, Gerrit de Wet, 17th century Israelites. God commands Moses to construct 2 new tablets. Moses ascends the mountain again, where God dictates the 10 Commandments for Moses to write on the tablets. Moses descends from the mountain with a transformed face. From that time onwards he must hide his face with a veil. Moses assembles the Hebrews and repeats to them the commandments he has received from God, which are to keep the Sabbath and to construct the tabernacle. The Israelites do as they are commanded. From that time God dwells in the tabernacle and orders the travels of the Hebrews. Composition. Authorship. Children of Israel in Egypt, 1867, painting by Edward Poynter. Jewish and Christian tradition viewed Moses as the author of Exodus and the entire Torah. But by the end of the 19th century, the increasing awareness of discrepancies, inconsistencies, repetitions, and other features of the Pentateuch had led scholars to abandon this idea. 26. In approximate round dates, the process which produced Exodus and the Pentateuch probably began around 600 BCE, when existing oral and written traditions were rebrought together to form books recognizable as those we know, reaching their final form as unchangeable sacred texts around 400 BCE. 27. Sources.